I'm the moderator for Forum this evening, the future of Redfield Forum. We'd like to thank you all for coming out. It's a nice crowd, nice turnout, and we have a lot to discuss this afternoon. Before I go on, I'd like to introduce you to Dean Calvert, who is the interim president, and he will also throw a word this evening.
Thank you, Bernadette. Thomas Nelson Community College is very pleased and honored to be hosting this forum this afternoon on the future of welfare reform. It's certainly my pleasure on behalf of our college to welcome each of you to the SGA's WAC Student Alliance Forum. It's an important subject, one not only to recognize but to discuss in the kind of format you all have chosen here this afternoon. And I certainly commend our Black Student Alliance here at Thomas Nelson for supporting and organizing this forum. In a recent Daily Press article, a single mother of 3 unemployed and on public assistance was facing considerable difficulty in obtaining reemployment. In response to her testimony, Anthony Newport News officials warned our local business owners that they would be making a mistake to refuse to hire their client and others like her because they thought that folks who are on public assistance don't want to or won't work. But Mary Eason further stated that we must change our perception of welfare. And we will only change welfare as we know it by putting people to work. As an indicator of success in these types of instances, one of our panelists here today, Roy Thompson, from Newport News, during that hearing at the Chamber cited the Newport News' Bridges program, where employers can hire a welfare recipient for the first 3 weeks and have those funds paid by a grant from the Virginia Employment Commission. Programs putting people to work. This individual involved closed the article that was quoted in today's press by saying further that all we want is a hand up, not a handout. That statement further mirrors the current article in the Reader's Digest by the same title, the hand up, not a handout. Many of these programs, such as the one indicated in the Reader's Digest article, reflects a novel, non-public approach, putting a program in use as a prime tenet of creating personal integrity, dignity, responsibility, and independence, not dependency. It has become a recognizable mandate for successful social support service programs. For me, the timeliness of this subject was brought home in a very meaningful way about a year ago as I was speaking with a neighbor of mine who was returning to Germany after living in this country for a couple of years. And I asked the Lord that all the things over the past 2 years that while living in this country, what were the strengths and weaknesses? And I will never forget what the Lord told me in terms of what He thought my greatest weakness in this country was. And that was our failure in this country to provide an adequate safety net for those Americans who are living, contributing, responsible citizens who, for some unfortunate reason, could not find employment or for some reason became unemployed and fell through this, what we call our societal crack in social services. And he said, we in Germany would not allow that to happen in the same way that you Americans have allowed to happen to your folks. This is not acceptable in our country. He said, we have been really shocked to find that true here in America. Yes, there is much misunderstanding, much misinformation regarding the American social welfare system. Americans are frustrated and they are pressing for social and welfare reform. This is based on a combination of fact and misperception. And it's been easily apparent for many of us who have read the papers recently on the Proposition 187 reform in California. And we know what has happened there in terms of a politically fashionable resistance to some of those programs that the state of California had in existence before they were illegal immigrants. It just points out in terms of public perception, again, based on much misinformation, in many cases, wrongful information, where in fact, misinformation emerged and where people become resistant. What I found even more interesting was the recent issue of Newsweek. They noted that it took this country about 60 years to erect our modern welfare system in America. It is now being threatened for substantial revision or even possible in many ways dismantlement. Newsweek noted, though, that one major surprise for everyone in terms of American welfare system may be lurking in the shadows. The uncomfortable truth may be discovered that dispels the perception that the American middle class, not the American poor, are the beneficiaries of our modern American welfare system. In other words, roughly 1/2 of American families receive some form of benefit from the federal government. A Social Security check, a farm loan, a tax break, or a federally guaranteed scholarship. Only 1/3 of the money on government entitlement programs goes to the poor. And that certainly will be an uncomfortable truth which America must deal with during the future of welfare reform. And further, Newsweek said that in order to balance the federal budget without cutting Social Security or further defense spending, domestic spending would need to be decreased by approximately 36%, and the following cuts would need to be made in the following 3 entitlement program areas. Veteran benefits, 24% cut. Medicare, Medicaid, 30% cut. And aid to the poor, 35% cut. Proposals are rampant, and one current plan goes with major revisions to the modern American welfare system, and will be uncertain under great debate in the next few months ahead. These problems that we're speaking about, the reasons you folks here today, to understand where we are and where we're expected to go, these problems are real. And those of you in this room today are facing these problems, mostly in terms of the results and causes, rather than the causes per se. I think if any of us were walking down the road, we were continually suffer blisters on our feet, we would be more concerned about probably getting a new pair of shoes than just treating the blister or, in effect, changing the Band-Aids. The remediation of our current welfare system today is one that is very contentious, one that is fraught with a lot of emotion, and it's certainly for you folks who are the expert panelists who are willing to consent to come here today. We look to you for being major players in the future of American welfare reform. Thomas Nelson Community College wishes to be a major player in this because we have responsibilities far beyond just our own classrooms, but in terms of collaborative partnerships in training and retraining. And it's the responsibility of our college to be involved, and we want to do that. Future welfare reform is a formidable, a necessary challenge. I recognize and praise your efforts to discuss this very important subject, and I praise your committed work in this challenge and wish you all well here on the panel this morning on the progress toward the future of welfare reform. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Dean Howard. Let me say, my key cards are somewhere with my son right now, so I'm going to win it. All right, I had all these speeches rolled out for everyone, but since he's not here, I'm going to go ahead and go off the cuff here and hope I do good. All right. Before we get started, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. So many people have helped us put this together. When I say us, Black Students Alliance Association here on the campus, and I think that we should go any further until we give them some sort of accolades and say thank you. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to our student government president, Mr. Dave Sanders. Dave, will you please stand? Willie Brown, who is our student liaison to the Dean's office. These are the people who help us with money and all the other good stuff, bookkeeping and so forth, so we'd like to say thank you to them. All of the Black Student Alliance people, I know that we have some in the back here. Would you kind of raise your hand and say hello so they know who you are? It's about 10, 15 of us? Yes. Okay, Mrs. Stacy Knight. Mrs. Knight was the one who had this great idea and was the one that coordinated it, and we would not be here this afternoon if it wasn't for her. So Stacy, I think you should stand. Let them see you. Charlene, where's Charlene? Oh, she's in the back. Charlene Jones, who is our coordinator, she was the one that had the headache for the last 3 weeks. We run back and forth in her office, praying, getting things together. Unfortunately, she's not here. Here she is. There she is. That's our favorite coordinator. Okay, I think that's about it. Okay. So, with that, we'd like to get started with our discussion. Our panelists, all of them are professionals. Some of them are lazy professionals. Okay? But we would like to get started with our students here at Thomas Nelson. They will be giving you a viewpoint. Hopefully, I think we've gotten a broad range from different opinions from all of them. I think we should get started with Ms. Brenda Freeman. Brenda?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Brenda Freeman, a student at Thomas Nelson Community College. Member of the advisory board of the gender equity program we have here at Thomas Nelson for single parents. My mother is 6, and the license practice of nurse. The major is nursing, area nursing, and police science. I'm here because I am for the welfare reform. And to me, reform means to make some changes, to improve, and to upgrade some things that perhaps were going on in the welfare system that could benefit those who are on and perhaps get off to be parents or single parents who will be financially independent of the system. Some of those changes to me would include the educational system, the housing, the transportation, daycare, and quite a few others. And I would like to see some changes, of course, education, where the recipient will have a chance to get an education, not only high school or a 2-year degree, but 4-year degree, perhaps higher, to qualify for jobs that will eventually get them independent of the system. As far as housing, qualifications for housing may change as far as the area or being placed in a neighborhood of lower socioeconomic status. And also, welfare reform would include, to me, may make some changes of the social status of the individuals. And talk about upper class, lower class, middle class, and lower classes. Now, so far as taking into consideration all of the things that would include the things that are concerned one family unit or the single parent unit or the welfare recipient, take into consideration all of the things, I believe that a reform may change the social status of that individual or that family. I think that some of the restrictions should be lifted educationally or financially for the recipient so that they can progress and not regress after taking 3 steps forward and maybe 5 backwards. The reform would include the removal of the abuse of the system and some of the stereotyping of the recipients who are maybe involved. And just some changes that would would eventually cause a person or recipient to be completely independent from the system. That's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Brenda was kind enough to come on the panel this afternoon. We want to say thank you again. She kind of said to me, Brenda, I don't know. I said, Brenda, we have to have a viewpoint from all walks. Like, I hate this thing. Get out of here. But so we'd like to thank you, Brenda, for your comments. Are there? Let me ask you, Brenda. Are there as a recipient, what are the type of things that you would like to see happening for us immediately right now? What's the first thing that you would like to see happen as a recipient?
One of the things, so far as since the single parents are parenting children of two people that are involved, which includes the fathers, I think there should be some changes that would include the fathers as support, not as it is, but make them have a very active part financially. What I mean by that is, as it stands for some, the mother or the father, whoever the single parent is, they are stuck with the bills and all the care of the children while someone is perhaps trying to pursue the other party for the support of the children or a child. But during this time, the children have to be cared for. And as it stands now, the recipient is looked upon as a person who does not want to work, does not want to do this, but you have to consider the fact that the single parent have to pay daycare if necessary if they're going to work. The fact that the medical expenses, all of those things, housing, clothing, shoes, education of the children, all those things are involved. And I would like to see rules and laws changed to pursue the other party that's involved of taking care of the children. As far as education, as an independent person myself, I have the initiative to do some things in spite of. I have 6 children. I have found no problem of taking upon myself to go to school, to get jobs, whether the job end or continue. There's still some things that is almost impossible to do at a certain level, financial level. Now, for a single parent also, I would like to see a change in if the parent will work part-time or full-time, that they will not be penalized for working or to get an additional income to support those children and herself. And that's the way it is. What you get for the children, and if you do something by way of self-employment or employment, you have to report that, and what you are getting be taken away from you. That should be changed. That keeps you at the same level. There's no upward mobility in the social or the income area.
Thank you, Brenda. Okay. Our next panelist is Dave Seabolt. He's a student here at Thomas Nelson Community College, and he's also president of UGE. Dave?
Yes. My point of view on this is pretty much there's absolutely no way we can turn this nation out into the street and not support anymore. It would create the kind of conditions that we see around the world nations that are already starving. It would be nice if we could possibly have some kind of reform where we could bring people who are presently on welfare into a condition where they can start to support themselves. It is a definite blow to their ego that they are having to live off of somebody else's money, and it does look bad as an employer to look at somebody who's been living so long with somebody else's money and hasn't worked for their own. But my point of view is it would be nice if we could work some kind of system where there would be an incentive for employers in this area to start hiring people who are on welfare currently. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I failed to let you know that once our panelists complete their presentation, we're going to open the floor up to the audience to ask them questions. So while they're talking, think about some questions, if you have not already, have some prepared that you would like to ask our panelists. The next one is Nathaniel Ward. He's also a student here at Thomas Nelson Community College, and he's retired military, and he's from the Naval Secret Service. All right, Mr. Ward.
Thank you. Basically, what I'd like to comment on is a lot of individuals here are not aware of Representative Bill Archer's new bill that he has introduced, as pending introduction. It's called the Personal Responsibility Act, and it will be introduced within the next 100 days. Since the election, the saber rattling of the Republicans has begun. The purpose of this new bill is to reduce dependency. While I disagree with some of the provisions, however, I do agree with their purpose. That is to reduce or eliminate dependency. This bill recommends a $10 billion block grant to be used by the states to eliminate reform welfare as we know it today. With that understanding, basically my point of view is, sure, use the $10 billion block grant and let the states have the money, but make sure that it's under the auspices of someone in social services that deals with the individuals on a daily basis. They know what the intricate problems are, the innate problems are, where the individual come to them and they have questionnaires, they go through this, the social service people are the pulse of the people that are the recipients. And what you can do with this $10 billion, don't put the cart before the horse. Have public sector and private sector as well involved in a concerted effort to this endeavor. What you have to do is have the private and public sector identify jobs that individuals can work in and make sure those jobs are identified and counted up before you use the money to send the individual schools. The individual I'm talking about going to school are first to get the GED for a person that's on welfare. Give them some self-esteem, because if you don't do that, you don't choose that viable alternative to induce self-esteem and personal pride, it's going to pass down from one generation to the next generation. Once public and private sectors are involved and the jobs have been identified and the resources, since Representative Bill Archer has already identified that $10 billion earmarked for that purpose, let's not use it as the Republicans see fit to use it now. What some of the revisions that they have, I'm not knocking the Republicans or anything, I'm not getting on the Democratic platform as well, but just to make you aware of some of the current proposals. Number one, to deny aid to families with dependent children, the AFCD, to unwed mothers aged 17 or younger, and give those funds to states as block grants to care for those mothers and children. Proposal 2 requires states to impose a family cap in which mothers on AFCD are not given more money if they have more kids, more children. Proposal number 3 grants states nearly $10 billion over the next 5 years to design and run work-related programs. States will decide who has to participate in what, but federal rules will be minimal work requirements and also require states to end welfare to a family after 5 years. I see that provision to put a cap on and have it end in 5 years is a reasonable as far as my personal viewpoints are concerned. Get the individuals identified, have the jobs already set aside in public and private sector, have the individuals enrolled in these programs and tell them from the inception, once you enroll in this program, you have a 5-year mandatory time period in order to complete this program. Some will be motivated to complete it within 2, 3, or maybe 4 years. And once those individuals have completed this training program, another thing I want to add, daycare is a prerequisite. You have to make sure the funding is available there, because none of the other things are going to work. And once the individuals have been identified, the individuals are in these programs, and the jobs are already set aside, you use that $10 billion to fund these programs, and individuals can have the self-worth and be able to be a market commodity, a valuable resource that the federal government and the private sector are going to gain from this. Everybody's going to benefit. Those are my personal views. I thank you for my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Those are our students from Thomas Nelson and their viewpoint, and again, we'd like to thank them. If you do have some questions for them, we will give you a chance later on in the afternoon. Next is two professors from here, from Thomas Nelson Community College. The first is Miss Diane Burton. She's a political science instructor here at the college, and she will give you somewhat of a background of social services and the history.
My task in the short period of time I've been allotted is to provide a brief overview of the types of welfare and entitlement programs provided by the federal and state governments. First off, let's make a distinction between entitlement programs and welfare. If you or your employer contributes to a program, you are entitled to draw benefits at certain times. The largest item in the federal budget is the Social Security program, which pays benefits to 40 million people. It costs the federal budget about $325 billion a year, by far the single largest item in our budget. Unemployment is another large entitlement program, and Medicare, which is health care for the elderly, and which costs the federal government another $156 billion every year, is another entitlement program. Welfare programs, on the other hand, are means-tested programs, which means that your income and your assets have to fall below certain levels before you qualify. The largest means-tested programs are AFDC, Aid to Families with Dependent Children, Supplemental Security Income Insurance, or SSI, Medicaid, and food stamps. There are some others, including rent supplements, nutrition programs, Pell Grants. Altogether, the federal share of all means-tested programs will cost somewhere around $157 billion a year, or about 10% of the federal budget. AFDC was created in 1935 as part of the Social Security Act, as part of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal legislation. In 1994, it will cost the federal government approximately $17 billion. This is the least popular welfare program and the one which we'll be focusing on reforming. This distributes cash benefits mainly to poor single-family households with children. Most of this goes to female-headed households. This program is administered as a state and federal partnership. The federal government provides most of the money but allows the states to set the benefit level. And this benefit level varies from state to state. The average welfare check in California, AFDC check in California, is about $600 a month. The average AFDC check in Mississippi is about $100 a month. We will spend probably $17 billion, as I said, in federal money this year and a few billion more in the states, or about 2% of our federal budget. It was 6% of our federal budget in the early 1970s. So the percentage of our federal budget which is being spent on welfare has been declining steadily since the early 1980s. Medicaid, or health care for the poor, is now the most expensive means-tested program. It costs the federal government about $110 billion. Altogether about $110 billion. The federal government pays for about $72 billion of this. So it's a program that is shared by the federal government as well as the states. This is the most expensive one, as I said, and the elderly poor, who account for only 15% of Medicaid recipients, account for 60% of Medicaid expenditures. This requires, the federal government requires coverage for anybody who is on AFDC or SSI, and it's up to the states if they want to provide additional Medicaid coverage for people who are beyond those two programs. SSI is a federal program paid for and administered completely by the federal government. We spent about $19 billion, or we will spend about $19 billion this year on the SSI program. This program was created in 1974 to provide a check to old people, the blind, and the disabled. So it helps poor people, but only poor people who fall in certain categories. The states are allowed to supplement SSI payments, and about half of the states do. Food stamps. In 1994, we'll spend about $22 billion on food stamps. 1 out of 10 Americans receive food stamps. This number includes the working poor, because you can receive food stamps, unlike some of these other programs, and still work. They pay food stamp benefits to people who fall at about 130% of the poverty guideline. And the food stamp program was started by the ASD, or the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to maintain the purchasing power of lower income consumers, to make sure that people, even poor people, still buy products produced by farmers. This is a program which is administered by the Department of Agriculture. Okay. And I think that's about all I want to say, and I'll leave the rest of it up here to Lee.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. Our next professor is Mr. Lee Hubert. He's professor of sociology here at the college. Mr. Hubert?
Thank you. I want to start off telling you a little bit about a personal experience I had with a student I became familiar with a couple of years ago when I first started teaching here. And through the Jobs, Opportunities, and Basic Skills programs, JOBS, she was being required to come to Thomas Nelson Community College or some other institution to receive more education so that she would no longer be dependent upon aid to families of dependent children. And after talking with her, I realized how she had gotten on AFDC. It seems as though she had a $9 an hour job. She was a single parent and had a child who was very ill. And her position did not allow her any health insurance at all. And after the hospital payments took her house and her car and most of her other possessions, she had no other way to keep up with the payments. And she went to social services and they said, no, that we cannot give you Medicaid unless you quit your $9 an hour job and go on to aid to families of dependent children. And that she did. And look at the cyclical reasoning. Now they're sending her to school here, or they were, she's no longer here, sending her to school here so that she will no longer be dependent. The problem with social welfare in America is that it's looked in isolation of all other social issues. And you have to take a holistic approach to looking at society. You cannot separate the issues of low pay and unemployment or underemployment from programs such as aid to families of dependent children. There simply aren't enough jobs that pay a decent, livable wage, period. One needs to stand back and take a look at who really benefits from social welfare in America. Now, we know it isn't the people in aid to families of dependent children. I don't see too many people in here who would trade places with a welfare mother. And we know it isn't the middle class who's caught holding the bag. So who really benefits? And in my opinion, I think it's those people in control. I think it's the status quo. Take a look at public housing. You know, this is a way of subsidizing the building and real estate interest in America. Or take a look at food stamps. Aid to family dependent children. Is this really to benefit the poor? Or is this really to benefit agribusiness? And when I talk about agribusiness, I'm not talking about the family farm. I'm talking about Occidental Petroleum, Del Monte, Jolly Green Giant. Yeah. The majority of your business is corporate agribusiness. Basically, what your food stamps are doing are causing a greater demand on food, so it raises the value of the food, while at the same time, you get to pay for the food stamps. Except for those of you who are in the 10% who are receiving them. AFDC, many people suggested that it's some kind of scheme of do-good or bleeding hearts. But a growing number of us realize that it's actually a form of social control. No more than a form of social control. It induces low self-esteem. It stigmatizes. It serves to both pacify and induce apathy so that people won't rebel either at the polls or even in the streets. You know, what was the first thing politicians of both parties said after the riots in South Central LA? Gosh, these people need jobs. We need programs. Well, they were a day late, a dollar short. What the status quo in corporate America have done is to use aid to families of dependent children as a Band-Aid, as it is exported some of the better paying jobs to lower paying nations. And you paid for this with your tax dollars. It doesn't surprise me that subsidies to the wealthy, such as national flood insurance, the S&L bailout, free timber and mining rights, the aqueduct in California, these are sources of what I like to say is aid for dependent corporations. This is not an issue today. And why isn't it an issue? Because these people have powerful people in Washington and Richmond. The poor people have no pact. The poor people have nobody to support them. It's easy to stigmatize downward rather than look upward to where the problem really exists. So where are we headed with social welfare? What's the future of social welfare? I think it's we're going in the direction that a lot of the people are suggesting, that we're going from the frying pan to the fire. You know, the present direction is massive cuts without any viable alternatives. It seems to be the third worldizing of America. In Brazil, 9 million children roam the streets, and they have a population less than ours. We will see shanty towns pop up. It'll be a place where illicit means of support will exist. Crime, selling more drugs, prostitution, including child prostitution, so people that can support themselves. Where kids will go to work to support the family. Where diseases will run rampant. The present system is not working, and what America needs to do is to create jobs at decent wages instead of blaming the victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubert. Next we have, we are going to bring on the Social Services Department. We have representatives from Hampton and Newport News Social Services, and I think we'll get started with Mrs. Dory Thompson. She's the supervisor of employment services at the Newport News Department of Social Services. Mrs. Thompson?
Good afternoon. I thought you might be interested in hearing some statistics about the welfare population in Virginia as a whole. And these statistics are as of January 1994. There are 57,098 adults receiving AFDC in Virginia. And of those individuals, 45% have an education of below the 11th grade, and an additional 41% have a 12th grade education. So of those 57,000 plus recipients, 86% have a high school diploma or less. I don't know what the future of welfare reform is. I think we have to look at employment trends. I think we have to look at the education levels of the people that we're proposing should go to work. As Mr. Hubbard said, what we really need are jobs that pay a livable wage and a change in employers' perceptions of individuals who come to them for employment. At the beginning of this presentation, Dean Calver talked with you briefly about the Bridges program, and I believe Dave also spoke about it would be nice if employers had incentives to put people back to work. There are many incentive programs currently operating to encourage and motivate employers to put welfare recipients back to work. And those initiatives or those incentive programs were the topic of the community breakfast that was held by the Chamber of Commerce recently to enlighten the business community about these incentives. There's the Targeted Jobs Tax Credit, which is offered through the Virginia Employment Commission, which is a 40% rebate on an individual's wages. The Bridges program is an 8-week incentive program. There is a trade program where an employer will receive an incentive, a monthly stipend back, ranging from $175 to $275 for a period of 49 months. And the latest that we have is an initiative by Governor Wilder, which is the Welfare Reform Demonstration Project, and that returns 20% of an individual's cash wages at the end of the first year and 10% at the end of the second year. Are these incentive programs working? No, they're not. So it is not a failure of the welfare program to offer incentives to employers. I think what's operating here are misconceptions on the part of employers, but will those misconceptions change? I don't think so. I think we've heard things like ADC, being an ADC recipient reduces your self-esteem, makes you dependent, puts you in a trap that you can't get out of. It's true, and when you look at employment trends, employers are going for temporary employees where the wages are, they're willing to pay a temporary service to screen applicants. They're willing to pay 28% of the individual's wages to get somebody in a temporary position. Now, if that money could be returned to the form of wages and benefits, then we might see some people getting some jobs at a livable wage. One thing for sure, we will have welfare reform. The JOBS program is a result of the Family Support Act of 1988, and it took until 1990 for the policies and guidelines to actually come down where a workable program was identified. And the focus of that program was to give people basic skills, starting with literacy, the number of people that cannot read, and the kind of programs that are available for people to learn to read, which is a basic skill that you need for a job that's going to pay you a livable wage. The GED, as we mentioned earlier, providing people with a GED. The Newport News Department of Social Services, and I'm sure other departments across the state, fund GED programs, pay instructors to provide 20 hours of instruction a week, pay for the facility, pay daycare, pay transportation in order to help people to get the basic skills. Beyond that, we do have students here at Thomas Nelson. We fund an enrichment programs to ensure that they have adequate time to study. We provide daycare, we provide transportation. Now, 4 years later, the program is being scrutinized as not having produced enough working people. And why? Because, as I said, we have 57,000 people receiving AFDC, and 41% or 45% of those have less than a high school diploma. So I don't know what the future of welfare reform is going to be. I think it is going to be drastic, and I think the social consequences will be great. All I can say is hold on to your hats. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. We next have Mrs. Dawn Kynard. She's from the Hampton Department of Social Services. She's the supervisor of eligibility. Mrs. Kynard?
Welfare, as we see it, is simply part of the worn fabric of weakened social, economic, and institutional supports. There is no quick or simple fix for it. We have a lot of wasted human potential, and the garbage heap is mounting. Prison populations, the homeless, street gangs, and parents who abuse and even murder their young children. Washington and Richmond can make new laws and policies, but frankly, making Hampton the most livable city in Virginia has to occur right here. It's an awesome task and can only be done the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. As a business person, you hire one welfare recipient. As a caring citizen, you mentor one family. As a neighbor, you make it your business to see that the neighborhood's a safe haven for children. As a welfare recipient, you give something back to your community. You don't hide behind the guard station at Kingsmill. Start eating the elephant. Let me quickly tell you what Hampton Department of Social Services is doing to change within, because we believe that it's important that we change also. I'll conclude with some of the tough decisions that Washington and Virginia must bring about to effect radical change for the 130,000 children who receive AFDC in Virginia. That's roughly the population of the city of Hampton. Abandoning those children will have more devastating consequences than if a mighty cataclysmic event just wiped Hampton off the map because of generational perpetuity. Hampton's mission is about creating a gourmet community, one where everyone wants to live and safely do business and engage in pleasure. Within that context, the department's mission fits, and its key objectives are to reduce the amount of child abuse and neglect through comprehensive prevention and early intervention, to reduce the AFDC caseload partly by the way that we do business, and to reduce the incidence of children being placed in residential facilities outside of the community by developing effective community-based alternatives. Internal strategies to achieve the self-sufficiency objective include re-engineering work so that when you come to us as a customer, you're served by one individual instead of a multitude of program specialists. For example, the same person will help you find a job that authorizes your AFDC check and food stamps. We focus and shift our emphasis on outcomes rather than processes. Rather than measuring how many cases get approved or how many cases are done right, we look at how many people got good jobs. Staff work occurs in self-directed teams so that we're able to free up former supervisors so that they can develop resources and implement high-impact programs. One of the results of that is we're able to engage customers into the jobs program when they first enter the system, rather than several years later after dependency has become enmeshed or has taken root. We foster a mentor program that affords customers the opportunity to work one-on-one with a community member of similar background, common interests, and common career aspirations. Our present staffing ratio of 1 to 375 just really doesn't afford much opportunity to work with individuals one-on-one. So we depend on the community to play that role. We focus on customer strengths rather than their limitations, because once again, that fosters self-sufficiency. And we are engaging customers as resources to each other and to the community. That's equally important. Questions about welfare reform. If welfare reform only changes state and federal policy without changing the way we work or without achieving community buy-in, will more people become employed and able to escape poverty? Will more people become better parents and good citizens? Will neighborhoods become safer with fewer people committing crimes? Policy changes that cancel or deny benefits solely on time factors or birth of additional children may cause families and children to be worse off. They may increase homelessness and panhandling. They may increase crimes such as theft, prostitution, drug dealing, and gang violence. They may create a permanent underclass ready to go to battle with the haves. Yesterday's headlines voted that, with a headline reading, "Blacks declare state of emergency in Baltimore." Baltimore is not very far away from Hampton in Newport News. Public service employment has many desirable features, but the cost savings is not one of its virtues. Some costs in addition to wages are costly administration. People have to be placed, supervised, jobs developed, accounting has to occur. There has to be capital outlay for work sites, furnishings, and equipment. We use a lot of volunteers in the social service department, and one of the most frequent comments I get from staff when I say, well, don't you think a volunteer could do that? Well, where should they sit? On top of my file cabinet? Because we simply don't have space to bring in more people into our work organization, although we would love to be able to do that and like to invest in individuals and give them the opportunity to be able to do the kind of work that we do every day. Child care costs often range 2 to 3 times the cost of the monthly AFDC check. So what can Washington and Richmond do to reform welfare? They can pass laws that encourage and support local flexibility and the ability to adjust to rapidly changing environments. They can acknowledge the value of 2-parent families by providing supports to both parents and holding both parents responsible. In Virginia, we have what's known as a deprivation factor. For a child to receive AFDC, a parent has to be absent, disabled, or unable to provide support, care, and guidance. Don't do a good job about encouraging 2 parents to stay together or about encouraging families to form. In terms of work programs, we feel that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Involve non-custodial parents in job training, work programs, and nurturing and caregiving. Children do have 2 parents, and we should expect that both parents accept that responsibility. Give welfare recipients a competitive advantage in the labor market, even if it means replacing kids working for pocket money or seniors supplementing retirement benefits. If we're serious about wanting to make things better for kids, time limits shouldn't apply to parents who work full-time unless we significantly increase the minimum wage and the earned income tax credit. Strengthen job search and voluntary quit policy to curb abuses in the present system. We do find that people who don't want to work or seem like they don't want to work and fail to comply with various work and training requirements are often fraudulent. So one way to deal with that is to get serious about it and really require people to job search until they find a job and to have some penalty if they voluntarily quit or refuse to accept a job. Implement health care reform. You heard the story of the person who ended up right back here and on welfare because of not having health care benefits. That's absurd. Connect housing assistance to policy supporting self-sufficiency and welfare reform. One of the most difficult populations to return to self-sufficiency are families who receive the full benefit package, because it is very difficult for them to make a wage that equals or exceeds that full benefit package. However, only about 30% of public welfare recipients also receive housing subsidies. Everyone doesn't. Require lawmakers to read The Education of Little Tree. That's about an Indian boy who was placed in an orphanage. We need them to stop thinking that orphanages are the solution. On the other hand, supported living for multiple generations is an idea worth considering. Yet another example of how housing policy can be crafted to accomplish multiple agendas. Provide for the gradual diminishment of work incentives and transitional benefits. Right now there are transitional benefits. They're for 12 months, but then Medicaid and daycare is cut off in one magic day, when in fact the sum total of those benefits, like I said, might double, triple, quadruple the value of the AFDC check. But we give them for 12 months and then no more, rather than gradually diminishing that support. To me, it's important that we reintroduce the notion of prudent person. That's a concept that used to be in food stamp policy many years ago, and it meant that you could use good judgment, use common sense. That's not a part of the welfare system today. One shoe does not fit all, and poor policy results when the prudent person concept is not applied. Let me give you an example. We have some students here at Thomas Nelson right now that we cannot support through our daycare program because there's not enough resources to stretch. Yet, prudent person that I think I am, I cannot say no to paying a grandmother $1,000 a month to stay at her children's house while they sleep and the mother works a night job. That $1,000 would probably support 3 students here at Thomas Nelson Community College. That's an example of not being able to be a prudent person. Do not implement entitlement reductions for poor people without making significant reductions in entitlements for the wealthy. Farm subsidies, mortgage interest deductions for mansions, massive tax breaks that many wealthy seniors receive. In conclusion, welfare reform that makes things better for children and families will be costly. However, it is terribly wrong and will cost even more in lost human potential if budgets are balanced on the backs of the poor. Welfare people want to work. I believe they should be required to work, and they will work if jobs are available and wages are sufficient to allow them to escape poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kiner. I believe Ms. Kiner has also served on the state work group, which was drafting a policy to implement welfare reform passed by the Virginia Assembly. So she's been very involved in the welfare reform issue quite a while. And while I'm here, I'd like to have the Hampton Department of Social Services stand up. You can tell these women, all of these people are very interested in what's going on with Hampton Social Services. If you would, could you please stand and let them see? All right, I think it's one yes. Okay. So we can see that our local department is very concerned about this issue, and we'd like to thank them all for coming out. I also would like to mention the mentor program because it's second to my heart. I've a volunteer over there, and Crystal Harris, who's here, she just left the organization, but it is a fantastic program, and you may want to look at it and see if it's something that can help you or someone that you know. Now, we saved the state government for last, all right, because we think that they're the ones that's going to be making the policies in the future. So we would like, I wanted to hold them for last, and so they can tell us specifically what's going to happen. Right, Mr. Brown? Okay. We had tried to get Mr. Brown to bring out the draft of what will be submitted to the governor's office, and he said no, he can't do that, but he will try to give us some sort of a summary. Before I bring him on, though, I would like to introduce you to Mrs. Debbie MacArthur. She is an executive assistant with the Lieutenant Governor's Buyer's Office, and I think that she has some information she would like to share with us as well. Mrs. MacArthur.
Thank you. Can you hear me without a microphone? This is fine. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today and to be representing Lieutenant Governor Dawn Beyer. It's good to be in these kinds of forums because in the last hour I've had reinforced that we have been doing the right things in the last 3 years as we have worked on this issue. 3.5 years ago, Lieutenant Governor Beyer came to his staff of 4 and said, I want to look at welfare reform. I think it is a major problem in Virginia. We are trapping the poor in dependency. We are not achieving the goals that we want. Government is large and overblown and not really achieving what everyone wants here, so I want to take a look at it. Please remember, this is 3.5 years ago. This is not 3.5 weeks ago after the current election, where it is now a sexy issue to look at welfare reform. The Lieutenant Governor put together a poverty commission, and we spent 2 years on the road having public hearings all over the state, talking to thousands, and I mean thousands, of people who are recipients of the welfare system, who are participants in the system, who are staffers of programs, etc. We talked to experts, we talked to real people, and as a result of that, we came up with a piece of legislation that went through the Virginia General Assembly last winter that was called the VIP program, the Virginia Independence Program. And that program was based on principles that we distilled as we talked to those thousands of people and the experts on the issue of poverty. And we came out with 3 basic principles, and I think you will agree with them when you hear them, because they certainly echo what all of the people have said here this morning. Number 1, if you work, you shouldn't be poor. Is minimum wage enough money to purchase the basic services of life? No. Do you know how much it costs an hour? If you work a 40-hour week, do you know what kind of wage you need to make in order to purchase the basic services of life? $7.50 an hour. Minimum wage is $4.25. Okay, so the first principle that we set down and on which we built welfare reform in Virginia was, if you work, you shouldn't be poor. And therefore, it is not worth the time, effort, energy, and money it takes to take people that are currently on public assistance and put them into a $4.25 an hour job. That is not going to end dependency. It is not going to elevate people's ability to become personally responsible. People are throwing that term personal responsibility around awfully freely, but they fail to plug in those skills and tools and resources people need to become personally responsible. The second principle that we delineated, again, you heard this from many of the people here, was if you are a child, you should have the financial support of both your parents, and they should be adults. Again, this is not brain surgery, okay, but it is something that people had not articulated. You should have the financial support of both your parents, which means establishing paternity at the time of birth. It means aggressive child support enforcement. And your parents should be adults, not teenagers. The biggest predictor, the strongest predictor of who is going to be poor in Virginia is the child that is born to a teenage parent in a single-parent household. Okay? So the second principle is, if you're a child, you should have the financial support of both your parents, and they should be adults. And the third principle was, if you receive public assistance, you incur private obligation. And that's a part of the political wind that's going on now. There's this perception out there that there are welfare queens sitting around taking in thousands of dollars a month and ripping off the hardworking public. And that's not the case, and we know that. But nonetheless, that perception is out there. So we thought we needed to look at how do we reestablish that relationship between those on public assistance and those paying through their taxes. We put a piece of legislation together. It took 3 months to hammer it out, literally hour by hour. The Lieutenant Governor made a very conscious decision at the beginning of that process. He said the client for this bill is the welfare recipient. Okay, many of you have made the point that the middle class gets mortgage deductions and they have their entitlements, and the upper classes have their entitlements. And we thought, wouldn't this be a radical idea to sit down and write a piece of legislation so that it met the needs of the welfare recipient, not the other interest groups. And we felt it made us intellectually and practically honest to take that approach. Because if we are in fact meeting the genuine needs of people who are welfare recipients, and we were doing that practically, the other interest groups wouldn't have a lot to say about the kind of things that we wanted to do. Well, what does this program do? Very briefly, I know I could go on for hours about it, but the first thing it does is it establishes a social contract, and you have intensive case management between the welfare recipient and the social services department. I believe you said you've got a 375 to 1 ratio of social service worker to recipient. We mandated in this bill that you must have a 45 to 1 ratio. 45 to 1. Okay, a radical change. And we specifically wrote into this legislation that you cannot expand the number of people that it applies to unless you have the resources to maintain that 45 to 1 ratio. Okay. Second thing we said, and you've heard this, was there should be a time limit on this. Okay, open-ended receipt of public benefits. It is not really helping anybody in the long run, and it's certainly getting a lot of people teed off and creating some of those stereotypes and misperceptions. So we put a 2-year limit, not a 2-year lifetime limit, but we put a 2-year limit on receiving public assistance. We wrote into the bill that if you then went 24 months or another 2 years without receiving public assistance, you could cycle back on again. And we also wrote into the bill that if there were emergencies in your life or changes in your life that required that you receive public assistance, they would be taken up on a case-by-case basis. Okay. The next thing that we said was, and you've heard this as well, we put a child cap on. We said we are going to have a contract between the recipient and the people of Virginia. And the people of Virginia are going to be required to make intensive investments in poor people for a 2-year time period. And what we are asking in return from poor women particularly is that you delay childbearing for that 2-year time period. Doesn't say you can't have children afterwards, but we are asking you to take all your energy and focus it in to becoming self-sufficient and having your family become self-sufficient. What we have said is that if you have additional children during that 2-year time period, you will not receive the additional increment in AFDC that you would get for that child, and that works out to about $56 a month. That's probably the most controversial part of our bill, but again, we are saying we want to make this investment in you. You need to be a partner in this. That means we will get you birth control in a way that's appropriate to you. Part of your social contract will be your family planning and how you are going to avoid pregnancy for that 2-year time period. But nonetheless, that's going to be the rule. The third thing we did was we had to say the standard of need in Virginia needs to be recalculated. Right now, for the average person on public assistance, you have to be making no more than about $8,600 a year. Well, we think that needs to be doubled. We think that the standard of need needs to be raised to anyone receiving up to $15,500 a year should be able to receive the entire package of public assistance and be involved in this intensive 2-year time period of investment in getting you from welfare to work. Okay? The next thing we said was we needed to draw down all of the federal daycare, jobs, and transportation and housing money that is available to us. In Virginia, the way it works is the federal government will give you money, but you have to match it with an appropriation from the state. And we have never in Virginia gotten all the money we could be getting from the federal government. It's there, we just haven't put up the matching funds. And that was a key piece to this, almost $7 million of additional appropriations to draw down another 12 million, I think is what it came out to in federal dollars. And that's an enormous increase in what's available to support childcare, transportation, housing, etc. The next thing that we did was look at child support, and we said you are going to have to establish paternity at the time of birth. We said that on a voluntary basis. I think the Allen administration may have taken it a little farther, and we're in support of that. But the idea is if you have children, you have to be financially responsible for them. And I'm sorry if I sound sexist here, but the women of Virginia, the poor women of Virginia, have borne the burden of the children in these single-parent families, and it is wrong that the men who help make these babies do not have to contribute their fair share. The next thing we did was we said we need to recalculate what benefits you can have. Right now, you can have a car that's worth up to the grand total of $1,500. If you have a car worth more than $1,500, you are considered to be wealthy, and your benefits are taken down. In our bill, we changed that to a car worth $7,500. Okay, a very significant difference. But the major thing that causes people to fall through the cracks is transportation, over and over and over again. Child care is very quickly behind that, but it is over and over again, it's transportation. And if you are compelled to try and maintain a life with a vehicle that's got a net worth of $1,500, you know that you're going to have problems with that. Okay, good. The next thing we said, and again, this has been mentioned, was right now there's a 12-month transitional period that as you get into the world of work, you can keep your benefits in terms of health care for your children and daycare and some transportation money for up to 12 months. We mandated in the legislation that that be a 3-year transition period because we felt that's what was really required. People don't, someone's clapping, that's good. People don't make that transition abruptly and never look back. All of us, whether we're making $100,000 a year or $5,000 a year, have chaos in our lives, and we don't always move forward, and we needed to recognize that. The last thing that I would tell you about is that there is a welfare avoidance fund that was in this piece of legislation. We are trying to avoid the up to 19% of people that go on public assistance because the car breaks down or because they don't have the rent money for 2 months. They need transitional support, but they don't need to go on public assistance for a prolonged period of time. We asked for a budget amendment to create a pool of dollars that social services people and communities could use. That budget amendment did not get passed. I believe, again, the Allen administration has made an improvement on that part of the bill, which we're very supportive of as well. But the idea of trying to catch that group of people before you have to get on welfare in the first place, so that the kind of person you're talking about with your student, is very critical. So that is the 5-minute overview of what we did in this bill, but I think it's important to recognize that it was written after 2 years of input from poor people all over Virginia and the people that work with them, and it was written with the welfare recipient as the client for the bill, and it was written based not on who do we blame, but what principles should be in place, what are the targets we need to go after to help people make that transition from welfare to work.
would like to thank Mrs. MacArthur. She's coming from Richmond, I believe. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes, and I
Not
think
that far away.
Mr. Brown, Jeff Brown also, they drove down, and we really appreciate that. One of the things I need to take care of, one more little housekeeping thing before I bring Mr. Brown on. I was remiss in introducing our acting dean this morning, Mrs. Sally McCullough. I'm sorry. Could you please stand? Dean Wolf couldn't make it here this morning, and she was kind enough to sit in her place today. So I do want you to know who our leaders are here at the college. All right. Next person, last but not least, is Mr. Jeff Brown, who is the Executive Director of the Governor's Commission on Citizen Empowerment. His commission has been tasked by Governor George Allen to develop a vision for statewide and comprehensive welfare reform in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And he's going to give us all the ins and outs of what they're doing right now. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. One of the nice things about going last is that you get to go last and listen to what everybody else has to say, and that enables you to decide what you're going to say. I found that today, though, the problem with going last is that everyone has said what I'm going to say. And quite frankly, particularly Debbie, has been right on the mark. I need to emphasize in my remarks here that all of the things that have been said here today have been heard today. They've also been heard by myself over the last year in my work with the Allen administration. They were heard by Debbie and Lieutenant Governor Byers' staff two years prior to that. And we're continuing to use those, the voices that we've heard all across the Commonwealth with regard to our effort at welfare reform. There is something else I need to say, and that is that I also took note of the very preliminary of the first comments that happened today, that welfare is something that's been around for about 60 years. And think about that, it's a long time, but half that time we've been reforming it. And it is my sincere hope that the future welfare reform, although I'm certain it's very bright and that we're going to do some really good things, I hope that the future welfare reform is very, very short. I hope we get it right this time. And I hope that we don't have to continue reforming this for another 30 years. I think that at the crux of what the Allen administration and the previous work of Don Beyer and the Wilder administration, I think what the crux of our approach to welfare reform boils down to is, well, quite frankly, it's fish. I'm sure you've all heard the story, the adage that you can catch a man a fish and he'll eat all day, but if you teach that same person how to fish, he can feed himself for his lifetime. That's where we are with regard to welfare in Virginia. You see, for 60 years, we've been catching a lot of fish. And we've been telling people that we're going to catch it better and more efficient for them, but we're still going to catch it for them. We have set up an apparatus whereby people have become very dependent on a steady stream of fish rolling into them, normally once a month. And that's about the extent of what we've done. We've been very well meaning in that, because people are eating, people are maintaining a basic subsistence. People are getting from one day to the next, 1 month to the next, 1 year to the next, and then they have kids, and their kids get from one day to the next, 1 month to the next. But we haven't given them a vision for the future, and we haven't given them the things that they need in order to formulate that vision for the future. We keep catching the fish appear on the doorstep, and then the next month we do the same thing all over again. What we have been trying to do in welfare reform is to teach people how to fish. We've been trying to give people the tools, we need to give people the tools they need to be self-reliant. And quite frankly, if we don't do anything else except for change our mindset with regard to how we look at people who are on public assistance, if we don't do anything but change that mindset and realize that the people who are on public assistance are not people who want to be there, they are people who want to fish for themselves. They're people who want to make a positive contribution. If we don't do anything else, I'll be happy. But we've got a lot more that's coming. And there are a lot more things that people need in order for them to be happy. Debbie talked about several things, and I won't go back through the list of things that she talked about. They are all things which the Allen administration believes strongly in, and which we hope, very sincerely hope, that we'll be able to do one better. The keystone of this, the cornerstone of this is work. Whatever we do for the people in the Commonwealth has to center around gainful employment, okay? And I emphasize that word gainful. It's been emphasized here throughout the afternoon. But it has to center on gainful employment, because with employment, you build self-reliance. With employment, you're able to give your children and your community the things that they need. Without that, you have dependency. I mean, it's a basic mathematical tool. I was an English major, but what little math I do understand, and it's very little, is that you can see that when people get things for themselves in a very mathematical way, they're able to give back to their families and their communities. There is one major difference between what the Allen administration is attempting and hopefully will achieve successfully, and what has been tried in the past. Because as I've listened throughout the day, I've listened to a great emphasis on the role of government. And quite frankly, government just cannot do it all. It gets back to the fish story. Government can distribute or redistribute or find as many fish as there may be available, but the fact is that government is dependent on something else to get those fish, to get those assets. And government specifically is dependent on taxpayers' dollars. And the taxpayers' dollars need to be redistributed or distributed, as the case may be, in the most effective way. And what we're seeing currently is that government just can't do everything. It was mentioned before that the business community has a historical aversion, if you will, to participating in bettering the lives and empowering the people who are currently find themselves mired in the system of dependency. And it's true. It's very true. And the reason why is because government has not ever heretofore had to step forward and play their, business has not had to step forward and play their part. The same is true in the education establishment. With regard to education, there's a great lady with whom I work by the name of Kay James, who says that if you can read and you can write, you can speak and you can think, you don't have to wait for somebody to give you a job. You can go out and get whatever job you want. And that's very true. We need to look again at what we're giving our kids who are growing up today in with regard to education. I mean, currently there are people who get diplomas from high school who cannot read the diploma that they carry from the stage with them. So what kind of a job, what kind of a future does that person have? It's true also in the church community and in the religious community at large, in both church and all three, churches, synagogues, and mosques, that those are areas of our society and our community which have historically and currently are willing to step forward and play their part in bettering the lives of people in their communities. They, if you go to church any Sunday, you sit in a church in which the pews are filled with people from all walks of life, all available resources. They have all different perspectives, and they're all ready and willing to put their backs into the work that needs to be done in the community. We need to re-engage the church community, the religious community, if you will. And we're finding as we go around the Commonwealth and we talk to people about that role, that they're just bubbling over with enthusiasm to help because they haven't ever been asked and they haven't ever been given a prominent position. We're finding also that there are a cornucopia of nonprofit organizations and other groups who are out and about, such as the United Way, such as the Urban League, such as the NAACP, and many, many other groups who also have a wealth of expertise which they can lend to this, and we need to get them involved. And then the last thing that I want to emphasize is that we do need to involve, and we are involving, the families who are involved, who are affected by welfare and their dependency on welfare or their participation in welfare. We're finding out that it is impossible to say to a mom who's on welfare, we want you to be self-sufficient. Go out and get a job. When what we currently do is we ask her to, if she's got $1,000 in the bank, get rid of that. If she's got a car, get rid of that. If she's got a husband, get rid of him. If she's got anything else, get rid of it, and then we'll help you. And it was mentioned before, and I tell you, it is one of the most ludicrous aspects of this system, that we drag somebody down until they're in the abyss and then say, now crawl out on your own. We can't do that anymore. And what we need is dads. Where are you guys? You need to be there. You were there when it happened. You need to be there throughout. And I'm sorry, your remark about being sexist, I couldn't have said it better. Absolutely, we need dads. And I also have to emphasize that we don't want dads for the checks, okay? We don't want dads so they can send us a child support check. We want you to be in the lives of your kids, because we have clinically shown, it has been clinically shown, that the incidences of crime, the incidences of school truancy, the incidences of illegitimate birth are all substantially lower when there are two parents in the home, because one person just cannot do it alone, particularly one person that's struggling on her own as it is. So I wanted to say that what we're trying to do in Virginia is a much broader scope than we had heretofore seen. And because it's a much broader scope, I sincerely believe, I deeply believe, that the people who are currently affected by this system have a much better chance, because now everybody is on board. Everybody has a piece in this. And quite frankly, people who never thought that they would be part of this system and the positive effects of a good system that works are getting on board with it and helping us out. Let me talk about a couple of specifics, and then I think, because a lot of the things that are in the Allen administration endeavor, if you will, have been mentioned already. Things like welfare to work, and et cetera. But let me mention a couple of very quick elements here. Debbie mentioned this concept of looking at what people's problems are when they come into the system and helping them to solve those immediate problems. I mean, it sounds like it should be common sense, but it hasn't happened before. That is one of our primary objectives with this new try at welfare reform, is to look at people before they get on the system, find themselves on the system for 2 years, then find themselves back out again, floundering around. We're trying to ask them, what is the problem? Why are you here? And if, in fact, we can solve that problem up front, we're going to do that. We call it diversion. We're going to try and divert people from coming on welfare in the first place. Child cap was mentioned, and a relook at child caps. I have to say that, well, once again, with all due respect to the people who mentioned this concept of finagling with child caps, that's way too much government. Currently in Virginia right now we have a child cap, which is 5 kids. And we could scale it up or scale that down however we want. The fact of the matter is, we wouldn't need to have child caps. We wouldn't need to say that you get extra money if you have this many kid or that many kid, if fathers and families were intact in the first place and fathers were able to and willing to make their contribution to the families. And so I think that what we need to look at again is, once again, the emphasis on strengthening and keeping families together. And then the last thing I want to mention is that, as I said before, government simply cannot do everything because there's so much to be done. And to that end, knowing that that's true, and at least using that as a basic premise for what we want to do with regard to welfare reform, I want all of you to understand that whatever we do in Virginia is done for the people of the Commonwealth. Therefore, whatever is done should be done with your continual input. Okay, it should be done with your interest in mind. And so I think my phone number is on the sheet here. It's on there, and I appreciate it. It's on there for a good reason. If you have suggestions, if there are things that you have not heard here today that have been missed, please give me a call. I'd love to hear it. All right. And if anybody has any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to take them. But a lot of what I was going to say has already been covered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. At this point, we're going to open up the floor to the audience to ask our panelists questions, if you have any. We've had a broad range of discussions this afternoon, a lot of different opinions, but basically they all are the same. Really, we need to definitely start welfare reform, but move in the area of helping the recipient, not hurting her or him in some cases, in developing the home, developing, motivating the recipient, helping the family to prosper and to move on. I think everybody basically said the same thing in essence, is that we need to start bringing the families together and helping the families to become self-sufficient. Do we have any questions? Dante? I'll come to you, Dante.
This question is for Mr. Brown. What are you going to do about child support? Because some people don't pay it, and you say you're going to look for these people. You say, well, we're going to look for these people, and you never find them. What are you going to do about it?
The question was, I'm sure everyone heard, the question was, what about child support and child support enforcement? The question of child support enforcement has been one of the most salient of the questions that have been raised before the Empowerment Commission. And the reason why is because there is a gulf of commitment between what, normally it's a mom who's on AFDC or public assistance has to do, and what the father of her children has to do with regard to their concomitant input to the lives of the kids. In other words, the mom ends up with 99% of the burden, and the dad normally, in a lot of cases, I shouldn't say normally, in a lot of cases, sort of gets away scot-free. And what we're trying to do is obviously to be able to collect a lot of child support payments from fathers. Currently, that's what we're trying to do. What we're finding is two things happen. One, we have a father who, well, three things happen. One, we have fathers who are involved in the lives of their children, but because of the federal law, which says that if you're on public assistance and the child support, which needs to be collected from the father, has to be collected by the government, the mother can only see, now I don't know how many people know this, but the mother can only see $50 of that child support payment. So if, in fact, you're a dad and you have a job and you're able to pay $200 in child support, the mother of your kids only sees $50. So there are one group of fathers who will pay that child support under the table. They'll pay that $200 straight to their kids because they'd rather do that than have the government scoop it off the top. There's another group, a second group, and that group is people who have jobs but are just, well, they're just bums. They don't pay. We are going to look at various ways to get at those gentlemen. They're mostly gentlemen. There are some ladies as well, to get them to pay. There are several states which have looked at docking people's driver's licenses, professional licenses, boating license, hunting license, fishing license. And what you do is you walk up to the DMV counter and you get ready to re-up or renew your tags for that year, and you find out, what do you know, you can't get your driver's license or your tags renewed that year because you haven't paid your back child support. It's funny how many dads suddenly find the money and pay up. And then there's a third group and there are some other things as well. We're also looking at expanding the privatization of child support enforcement. We're finding that our overhead currently, and it's in Virginia, I don't know that much about the other states. Well, I do know a lot about the other states, but I know particularly that in Virginia, our overhead cost for collecting child support is astronomical. We collect, for every about $3 we collect, over half of it goes to administrative costs. About $1.83 goes to administrative costs, which is a real drain. And we're finding that where we're able to privatize the amount of money that we're able to collect and give to families is much higher. Once again, there are some problems with privatization as well. Private companies tend to go after the dads who have the higher propensity for paying, of course. So there are some problems, but we're looking at ways to expand that. And then the last group of dads are the group of dads who are 19 years old, and they have just gotten a 17-year-old girl pregnant, and they don't have a job, and they ain't got no education, and they're not going anywhere, and they don't have a dime, and we can't get a dime out of them. Those are the guys who, quite frankly, are a major problem, because using today's logic, then government should inherently take that burden of cost. What we're asking is that we want the moms to help us to identify those guys, and if the government is going to pay their share, then the government wants to get something back from those gentlemen. And whether that is working in some capacity, volunteering in a hospital, whatever it might be, we want to be able to identify them and have them give something back to the community if they can't financially do that. So and to shorten my answer to your question, child support enforcement is one of the paramount considerations of this endeavor, and we're going to make sure that we put some good things in there with regard to child support enforcement.
Yes. Can I mention, I agree completely, it's a matter of collecting from those individuals that you can, and understanding when those you can't, we need to help them be in a position eventually to contribute. Probably the most effective piece of legislation we put through, however, was 2 years ago. And what we did was we changed the reporting requirement of employers, okay? Prior to the piece of legislation we put through, an employer had to report all new hires within 6 months. And with the way the system worked, it really was they had 9 months before the Virginia Employment Commission got notice of who all their new people are that they had hired. The Virginia Employment Commission would then check those names against the database of deadbeat dads, and they would then match them up and try and secure some child support that way. What we did was we changed it from a 6-month requirement to a 35-day requirement. And the figures are incomplete, but the latest one I've got is that over $27 million has been collected in the last year and a half. $27 million, and that's from that second group that you're talking about. It's the people that are employed, that are capable of doing it, but they know how to work the system as well as everybody else does, and many of them would switch jobs before it caught up with them. But in my opinion, that's probably the most significant thing we've been able to do up to this point. And you put that together with establishing paternity, and I think the noose is getting tighter.
Yes, my question is directed at Mr. Brown. After the recent election, the Republicans took over most of the seats. How would that reflect on the current welfare system at this point? Will we see any changes during this year?
The political climate has changed significantly since the elections. Some of us think it's a very good thing, some of us not so good. I will say, however, that with a new emphasis on welfare and welfare reform, that what we're going to see is a plethora of different ideas of how to change things. I heard over the weekend that some of my brethren up on Capitol Hill are looking at a period of time whereby a person would spend 2 months on welfare and then move on. Anyway, that notwithstanding, there are going to be various and sundry different things that are going to come from the Hill that we're going to hear, some good, some not so good. The major consideration in Virginia, there are two of them. One is that Virginia wants to handle Virginia. Okay. Whatever happens in Virginia, we want to have autonomy over that. We don't necessarily want someone from the federal government to tell us how to run our program in Virginia, because we think that Virginians presently have a voice, and we've heard it. We've heard it over the past 3.5 years, and we want to be able to follow up on that. The second thing is that the bottom line of this entire thing, the reason why we're doing all of this reform, and hopefully we won't be doing it for much longer, but the reason why we're doing it is because we want to help people out. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is that people need to have something to show for all of this. So whatever comes from the new Republican Congress, or the new Republican Senate, or the new Republican Governors Association, in my view, we need to look at it in a pragmatic way, being very mindful of the fact that it has to help people out. And we think that what we've got right now in Virginia with what we built from the Wilder Reform Demonstration and VIP View, which is what was referred to before, and then the current Empowerment Commission endeavors, we think we've got a very, very good product. So in answer to your question, I don't think there's going to be a great deal that's going to unsettle that. Will we see something in the next year? We certainly will, depending on how we do in this next legislative session that's coming up in January, and also depending on how quickly we can get waivers from the federal government to try and do some of the new and innovative and I think quite helpful things that we're trying to do. Yes, I think we will.
Yes, I have a question. This is addressed to Ms. MacArthur and Mr. Brown. I understand that the court system, as far as getting back to the child support, when you go down for child support to have it formed or whatever, that the court system just basically takes your word. They don't have the people who are coming in to establish a court amount bring in some proof of what their income is. You can basically give them by word, I make $250 a month and I'm unemployed, and they take your word and go for that. How come the system isn't set up to whereas when you step into the courtroom at that time, they have already ran your social security number in the computer to see where you are employed and what your income is basically before they set an amount of child support that will be established?
I can give you, first of all, in Prince William County alone, there's a 10,000 person backup in the courts in the area of child support. There are 10,000 cases behind. And in the whole area of the courts and child support, I think that's where it's going to take some significant investments on your part to really be able to speed that up. The second thing is, if this were simple, people would have taken care of it long ago. This is complicated stuff. And, you know, we don't even know exactly how long the average Virginian stays on welfare, because AFDC is not a system that lets you track statistics. It writes checks. That's all it does, okay? And my point here is that there is no place you can go in and put in a social security number and pull back out everybody's income in all the various pots of income. It doesn't work that way. I think it's a good idea. You will find many people in this country with good reason, I think, saying you are invading our privacy if you put all of this information together in a database somewhere. They'll think the Gestapo's coming after you next. I mean, it's not our value system in this country to keep massive files on everybody. Yet it's a very reasonable question. So how do we strike the balance between the need to protect privacy and individual rights and the need as taxpayers to know we're spending our money in the right places?
Yeah, there's one more issue that immediately jumps in my mind, and that is that when we talk about child support enforcement and we talk about the ramifications of trying to enforce what the courts hand down, there are several different types of people that we're dealing with. Child support in and of itself is a wholly different issue, which is a separate issue, I mean, outside of the scope of welfare and welfare reform. But I will say one thing, that very often with regard to child support enforcement, there are people who are currently mired in this system and find themselves in the system who would like very much to be able to support their families, who would like very much to be able to find ways to do that in a way that benefits their family. And our system, our welfare system, this is the welfare piece, our welfare system has so many disincentives to keep families together, to keep families from staying together, and so many sort of perverse incentives for fathers, that if we could just correct those, if we could just get rid of some of those, if we could just keep families together, we wouldn't have people going to court for child support enforcement problems in the first place. I mean, that's, in the scheme of child support enforcement, that's relatively minor, but with regard to welfare, it's major. And I mean, if we can just keep our families together, that might solve a lot of our problems in that regard.
We have another question in the back. She's going to come up to the podium.
I have two questions. One is, why there's so much, Mr. Brown, why there's so much stereotype in the news and in the media right now saying that there's many people in welfare are black people. As a research I did last year, history class, and a known fact from my work at school, I've seen 60% of my food stamps, I've seen people of my own race. And I would like to know why there's so much stereotype saying black people and anyone welfare.
Do you want to ask your second question, or do you want to just take them one at a time? Okay. You know, I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, I've seen the exact same thing you have. I've read the same figures that you have as well. I also know that after having gone around the Commonwealth of Virginia and talked to thousands of people on this subject, people who are directly involved in this subject, that it's not remotely true, and why that stereotype is out there, I don't know. I will say this, that quite frankly, personally, I don't care if you're black or white or blue. If you're caught in this system, you need to get out. We need to find ways to help you get out. We visited Southwest Virginia, out in the mountains, where the poverty out there, I mean, the unemployment rate in some of those counties, and I'm talking whole counties, is 19%, 20%. I mean, these people are poor, and they're caught in the same system. So, I mean, if the argument is over, you know, how many blacks are in the system, or how many whites are in the system, or how many, you know, purple people are in the system, I guess that's a valid argument. However, to me, I think we should measure our compassion by not how many people we have in our system of whatever color, but how few. And I would hope that at some point we could have very, very few of whatever color that they may be.
Yeah, I'd like to address that, and I think your question was, while the overwhelming majority of the people receiving some form of welfare are white, why is it always portrayed as somebody who's black? And I can even take that a little farther. It's usually a black woman with 2 armfuls of kids, right? Is that what it is usually? Where statistically it's a white woman about 30 years old with 1 or 2 children. And I think we can answer that question with one word, and it's called racism. And racism, it's subtle, but it's rampant. It's more under the rug than it was before, and it doesn't mean you have to be out wearing hoods on your head, burning crosses on your neighbor's yard. But what we're talking about here is people stereotypically being racist. And since we do stigmatize those people on receiving some sort of assistance, and we do stigmatize minorities in our society, a lot of times people like to put the 2 together, and they don't even realize they're doing it on a conscious level. And that's why I say we cannot look at this issue separate from other major issues that are going on. We can't look at this issue. I have here about an article, Paying to Lose Our Jobs, how this Agency for International Development, which operates out of the State Department, has persuaded factories throughout the United States, particularly in the Southeast, to relocate in low-wage Caribbean and Central American countries. And one of their advertisements is Rosa Martinez produces apparel for U.S. markets on her sewing machine in El Salvador. You can hire her for 33 cents an hour. That's what's going on here. It's welfare for the rich, aid for dependent corporations. I think we need to teach people how to fish, but I think we've got to stop giving all the ponds to the wealthy.
Mrs. McAuliffe.
I would add one other thing, and clearly racism is the critical component here. What I need to remind myself, however, is that every time any group in the United States, from the time we arrived here by whatever means, every time a group tries to enter the mainstream, the rest of us get threatened as hell, and we scapegoat that group, whether it's the Irish or the Germans or the Chinese or the Japanese or now the Cambodian and people from Thailand and Northern Virginia, whether it's Chicanos, you name it. Anytime we have to divide the pie up, and I think we're wrong in perceiving it that way, but we perceive it that there will be less pie for the rest of us. we turn around and we create scapegoats out of that group, whichever group it is, whether it's blacks, women, an ethnic group, a geographically located group. And it has been part of our history. I'm not saying it's a good part of our history, but it is a relatively predictable part of our history, and it is cyclical.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that question because I think it was a very good question. Not only do most welfare recipients, they are African American, they're all considered lazy, don't want to work, they just want to sit behind, sit at home and watch TV type thing. And I know that you've had a lot of work groups across the state. Do you find that to be true most with recipients?
That's why I express my personal frustration with the question, is because I really don't know why. I mean, we've talked about racism in history and those sorts of things, and those are all, those are all things that contribute. The fact is, though, it's just not true. It's just not true, and that I think what our emphasis needs to be is how to redirect the energies of people who are in the system, and then we can all sort of get together and fight these other problems. And I also think that there's also a perception that people who are not in the system don't care about people who are in the system as well, and that's not true either. I found, after going all around the state, that there are several people who are out there who want to do their part, but they just don't know how to get in touch with the people who are in the system. So I guess my point is, with all these horrible things that are out there, these horrible dysfunctions that are out there, and some really bad, messed up stuff that's out there, I think that the majority of people are good and well-meaning, and I'm hoping at least that we can...
But Mr. Brown, what you have on the newspaper and
right.
radio,
Right.
it is important because this is what's coming at you every day.
It's important, but at the same time, as a black conservative, what I read in the newspaper about conservatives and what I read about political people, 90% of the time isn't true either. I don't. It's not important. What's important to me is that people have jobs and that people's lives get better. And that's my own personal view on it. You're absolutely right, though. We need to all get together and change a lot of these viewpoints people have.
Okay. All right. One more question.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to say that for all the panel members is anyone and everyone who receives SSI or AFBC, and they are not poor. My mother has a master's in HRM. I'm going for my BS in art to be an RN. And I receive SSIs because I'm considered disabled from science now. And not everyone who receives an SSI or AFBC is poor. It's just not safe.
A point that was made before is that not everybody that receives public assistance is poor. And I think we've seen that if you are with General Boat up in Groton, Connecticut, that you can say to the federal government, look, I know that we don't have any need for new nuclear submarines for the next umpteen billion years, but we kind of need the money to keep coming. So you're absolutely right. I think all of the stereotypes need to be dispelled. They are just not true. And what we need to do is once again remember what the bottom line is. Are we helping people? I agree.
You can stand there. You won't talk loud. Education is training for jobs. Where are these jobs? And I got a comment so I can sit back down. You said that about the broken families, people develop, and not so much concentrate on getting checked, but just to leave, I'll be glad to get a check to support my young, because he needed that himself. Take down his guy, he needed a father himself. And a lot of people young, just people black men, they need stimulated. You know what I'm saying? And you can't take a child and expect that child to raise a child. I'm the one to raise my child.
That's
I
right.
get the support that I need from my family. And if I can just get a check from him, I'll be fine.
Hear, hear.
Hi, I was listening to the young lady who just finished saying about
everybody who gets SSI or ADC is not poor. As far as myself, in January I lost my job. I make $30,000 a year. I have 3 children. I'm a divorced mother. At the same time, unemployment ran out, child support stopped. I woke up one morning, my car was repossessed. And when you go to social services, everybody acts nasty. Like they're taking something out of their pocket, off of their table, and giving it to you. They give you every kind of hard way to go, and then maybe you might get something, maybe, if they feel like you know, look like you need it. And I think that's wrong, to judge somebody just by the outskirt. You know, people look at me, they don't know I get ADC. And what does that have to do with anything? I mean, you know, and I have an education, and I'm trying to do something else as far as going to school now, but I don't feel that we should be, or anybody that is on ADC or getting any kind of assistance should be treated as if they are insignificant. You know, like they're begging, or somebody's doing them a favor, or they're taking it from somebody else. It's wrong. I think it's wrong.
I think maybe we should direct that question to one of the local social service departments. Exactly what are we doing to kind of, I know what Hampton is doing, because I'm there with Hampton, so I know that they're trying to move forward with that. People are in distress. I was hysterical because I woke up and my car was gone. I called the police. I thought it was stolen. And it was repossessed because my ex-husband didn't make payment on it. Okay. You know, so people should be trying.
Well, let me say that we are trying to do a number of things, but we're certainly not altogether there yet. And one is, like I said in my comments, is shift from a position where traditionally when people came to the social services system, they were perceived as something being wrong with them, and you try to find out what was wrong, you know, what's missing, you know, what's the missing ingredient here. And we're trying to shift to the point where it doesn't matter if there's something wrong. Like the young lady just said, she has a disability, but she's still here at school, she's still trying, she's going to better herself. Is that we're trying to identify strengths, and we're not all there yet. It's a long process to shift people from an environment where they've been working many years and looking for and documenting deficits and why people can't do things and why they have to be on welfare, to looking at what their strengths are and how those strengths can be used in a variety of ways to strengthen their perhaps their relationship with their family, to look to develop support systems in the community, in their neighborhood, to again take all that they already have and just, you know, build on that, or if their skill is obsolete, retool them so that they can get back to work. But still the objective, as everybody here has said today, is to quickly move people back to work, and if possible even to divert them. So it may be a question of, you know, perhaps in this new environment where we have some ability to do that, and in the future where we have some ability to do that, maybe we could have helped you make that car payment and keep the car from being repossessed so that you didn't get into that kind of downward spiral of things.
What you're talking about is what we're trying to do for the people that are receiving. What about the people that are working there, that are implementing this to the people that are receiving? That's what I'm talking about.
Like I said, they have to change their attitude too, because they have been, like I said, basically not had a lot of training. Their training has been in how to calculate benefits, how to determine whether somebody is entitled or not, and not how to help someone feel worth, self-worth, how to help them get, like I said, redirected in terms of using their skills. And that's a major transformation too, but it's part of what we're trying to do internally, but we're certainly not fully there yet.
So what you're saying is that we want to educate the people that work there.
Yes, yes, definitely.
I'd like to make a comment,
Definitely.
if you don't mind. I'd like to respond to that as a Newport News employee. At our agency, we try to emphasize the concept of positive assistance with our workers. At our orientation, we stress the workers' commitment to interpersonal human relations with customers who come in. Within the last 2 years, we've changed from calling our customers clients, or we've gone from the terminology clients to customers, to try to alleviate the concept of there being a dependent relationship between a client, and a person who provides service. Also, as Ms. Conard said, you're coming in for, or people who come in for financial assistance are not coming in for an entitlement program, but for a means-tested program. So therefore, we're looking to verify all sorts of financial factors about the person's situation. That person could feel defensive about being questioned or asked personal information about who's the father of your child, when did you last work, on an income verification, do you have any money in the bank, how are you making it on no money? So yes, they do have to delve into areas that the people, for example, you said you were hysterical when you went down there.
Yeah, and I came in with a briefcase full of everything, and the lady was like, boom, finish, next person. It was awful, because there was no sincerity, no nothing, no feeling about anything. It's just like, oh, another one of them. And just stamp the thing and keep right on moving, and I think that's wrong. I really do.
Well, the other thing is that we are partially state funded, partially city funded, and any welfare department will tell you they're understaffed. For the caseload standards that are set and established, hardly any department actually can meet the staffing requirements that go with those caseload standards.
Well, I guess the bottom line is this: I'm a people person, okay? And every type of job I've been in is a bit different. And if you're not a people person, you should not work with helping people.
We also have some eligibility workers in the audience from Hampton Social Services, and I think they would like to respond to that question, since they are part of that. So,
just not going to give you my name. But one of the things that you were talking about, a caseload of 45. That might be manageable. We might have the time. And I don't think that you'll find many workers that don't really feel, and they want to have the time to do that. But when you're facing a caseload of 375, you have to spread yourself thin. You cannot be totally absorbed into each case and survive. It's just a matter of, we're all human, and I think we really strive to improve on that, and we're as proud to see good results, and, as anybody. But we have that human factor involved there too. Hopefully you will see some changes in the future.
The other thing I would like to add to it is that the recipients or the clients themselves must play a role in this process as well. We need to not just say, well, hey, I'm going to go down there and get my check and go back home. It's an effort between the eligibility worker and the client to sit down and come up with a self-sufficiency plan for that individual, because let's face it, the eligibility worker has a job, the client don't have a job, and the whole goal is to get that client a job, and who ultimately have that responsibility but the client itself, to get out and motivate themselves and move forward and try to do something, and have the support from the worker. If you do have a problem with one of the workers with their attitudes, and you don't think that they helped you out, you should complain about it. That's why Mrs. Conard is there. That's why Mrs. Thompson is there. Go and complain. I'll be upfront. I'm a welfare recipient myself. I have received welfare for 2 years now, and my process is trying to get through school. And when I have a problem, Ms. Conard will tell you, I get on telephone calls and like, hey, I have a problem. I write 2-page letters if necessary. And believe me, they get noticed when you go in and open your mouth up and stop complaining, and at home. Okay? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm glad here. What I want to know, Ms. Brown and Ms. McGrath, you're talking about training to get fit. Okay, this spring there's a number of welfare recipients coming out graduating. I myself will have 2 weeks. Will I have to leave Virginia in order to get a job with my family, or are we included in this program? Are we just dropped after graduating?
I can't speak to the specific programs, because I'm not sure exactly which one you're in, but
I'm in the accounting department. I would also have a degree in management. I was thinking probably the government. I mean, it would primarily help if there were jobs available, made available.
I will say this, that I cannot nor should I sit here and guarantee you that when you're finished, you're going to get a job. But I will say this. I will say that with the new initiatives that you heard about, some from Ms. MacArthur, and also some of the things that are coming forward from the Allen administration, that your propensity for success is going to be much higher. What we want to try and do, obviously, is have an environment in which opportunity is there. No guarantees, of course, because there never are any guarantees, but where opportunity is there. If you have those tools that you're talking about, then you are on the same footing as everyone else. And you'll be right there in line with everyone else to take advantage of those opportunities. And I wouldn't see why you would not. I think, however, it would be remiss, though, for me to say, because you're going through this, then you're set for life. But I certainly think that, with the tools that you say that you're going to have, that you'll be fine.